Light, to all photographers, is the great medium of revelation. Through its moods, noon brilliance, dusk, dawn, through the illusion of substance, broken bottles, empty streaks, packed streets, buildings, or cars, through the magic of a place in the moment, street photography conveys universal experience. It allows for the endless horizons of meaning. Like any art form, it tells us many things about its creators, yet unlike any other, it allows for a single moment in time to expose the world's most vulnerable attribute: truth.
Street photography is one of the more interesting aspects of photography, in that it tries to capture the real world as it unfolds. For that reason, it is a necessity that photographers should be free to not ask for permission, because the essence of that type of photography is to share the world as it is and not as we would like it to be.
I conducted an interview with Mr. Gustavo Escobedo, a professional photographer who has been teaching media arts, film studies, and photography for over 13 years. Before that, he had worked on several multimedia projects and has a deep connection to the art of street photography. Being a street photographer myself, and having completed the media arts program under his direction, we had shared the same passion for street photography and continue to work together to this day. I had reached out to Mr. Escobedo, asking him a multitude of questions to get his opinion on the conflicts street photographers often find themselves in. Should we ask permission? The whole essence of street photography is that it is a way to capture reality, with something to bring light to through our subjects. Street photography enables the photographer's own perspective and own take on the world around. For many, street photography is also referred to as candid photography, which is photography conducted for art that features unmediated change encounters within public environments. While you can ask permission out of courtesy, it could result in an image that doesn't represent a natural take on that moment in time.
As a photographer, you want to be sensitive to people, and not, you want to be, if you're truly trying to document the world, you also have to have an openness to that world. So if you are very forceful and you're very much getting in people's faces, then all of a sudden you're no longer an observant, you're all actively altering and changing the context, which is sort of goes against the objectivity that you're trying to do when you're doing street photography. So the photographer, each photographer has to gauge that for him or herself, and sometimes you will take pictures and people won't like it. Sometimes I think you need to have a conversation about that afterwards. You can try to explain your perspective, but from a legal perspective, I think it's important for people to know that at least in Canada, in the US, different countries might have other rules, but where we live, you have the right to take a photograph of anybody except minors in public. That doesn't mean you're in a mall, that's different because you're on private property, but when you're in public, you have the right to do that. If you think about when you're taking a picture, the wording is funny because you're taking a picture. I mean, that's just a phrase, but in a sense, ancient tribes talked about how you might steal their spirit by taking their photograph, because you now have this likeness of the other person. So there's a very tribal reaction to people getting their picture taken. I think some of it is, why do you want to take my picture? What are you going to do with my picture? And ultimately, you are in your space, you're using a machine that captures reality, and that person happens to be in front of that space. It's not like you're taking something from their pocket or something like that. They happen to be in public, you're in public, it's fair game.
I agree with Mr. Escobedo, although since most street photographers share the same opinions, even though we are covered in the eyes of law, the execution of street photography has still been met with refute and anger. As Mr. Escobedo had stated earlier in the interview, What happens as a result of taking someone's picture is a result of the approach. My two favorite street photographers are Vivian Maier and Bruce Gilden. Through studying these two, one can notice a large difference between their approaches. Vivian Maier is known to have the nickname Spy, for she was hardly ever noticed as a result of using a 50mm lens and a Rolleiflex camera, which holds down at your waist. In the contrary, Bruce Gilden is known for getting his ass kicked while conducting his art. Using a wider lens ranging through from 16mm to 24mm, although he did use 50mm lenses as well, gives him a distorted look when he gets close to his subject. And it doesn't help that he almost always uses a flash. This is quite a bold move, seeing that you generally don't want to attract much attention when you're out on the street. However, Gilden lives by the opposing philosophy. When he sees a subject that he finds interesting, he jumps right in front of their face with his flash and snaps a shot as they look up with faces of oblivion, alarm, and fear. He is based in New York, and he believes that his approach is the best way to show what people living in New York feel like. Therefore, understanding the completely different styles of these two photographers accentuate the point that the fine line of permission is reliant on a photographer's approach, which leads to considering exploitation versus respect in this creative medium. We've talked about the creative elements, positives of it, but the idea of street photography has often been met with refute and anger, of course through studying Bruce Gilden, and the idea of him coming in, have a huge flash and taking the picture of their surprise reactions.
Right.
Like you said, that's sort of not an accurate depiction of what's happening in that scenario.
Right,
They've
right.
altered it,
Yeah.
but it's still street photography.
Right. The question is it documentary photography or is it art photography? And I think that Bruce Gilden very, very much really pushes that line to the point where some critics would accuse him of caricaturing his, I was going to say victims, but basically he seems to have a bit of an agenda, right? Because the way in which he photographs them alters the appearance of the subjects.
Right.
So again, this is where you're crossing the line from observing into having a hand into how the final image works. So for example, some of his images, he's done the ones with a flash on the side, with a wide angle lens. The wide angle lens in itself, at close range, will distort the features of people. Yeah. So when he's already looking for somebody whose face or whose emotions are already off the middle of the chart, is going to exaggerate that. And maybe that's a point that's valid, that you're exaggerating something that's already there.
Exactly.
But the criticism is that he can be a bit heartless, and that he shows a lack of empathy for his subjects by photographing them in certain ways.
If we look at Bruce Gilden, who's definitely distorted the image for his own purpose, I believe it's a creative form of street photography, and then that still begs the question is, should we ask permission? In my opinion, I don't think so, because he's going out to get a certain image, and those images can't be replicated.
Correct, yeah. I would support Bruce Gilden, even though that's not what I would do personally. I support his right to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
While Bruce Gilden and all other street photographers alike have every right to conduct themselves in any way they wish, there still is a level of respect that needs to be taught to new people interested in street photography or candid photography, in which everyone needs to understand that this process is strictly for the purpose of art. Taking pictures of people for the sake of knowing that you have the right to take pictures of anything you wish in a public setting taints the purpose of the art form, creating a negative image that can receive backlash. As technology is advancing, almost everyone has some form of device with them at all times in which they are able to take pictures. This has resulted in the positive rise of popularity in street photography in the past couple of years, but also a rise in the exploitation of the art.
As a teacher, and sending students out to do street photography, you also want to teach people to be respectful. So for example, a category of people who are homeless, those people don't have the choice to be in public. They're in public because they have nowhere to go in which to conduct a private life. So I think it's it would be a cheap thing to exploit that. And I think you need to be more careful about photographing certain subjects in public because of the ethics that are involved in that.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. Personally, with the homeless people, I've taken pictures of homeless people, and those are the only people that I've ever asked. So, like, remember when I did the essay on on smokers, and I went out, and then there was the one homeless guy. Yeah, so that I had taken their picture and then followed up with telling them, look, this is what I'm doing. This is the purpose of it, and everything like that.
Right, and I think also beyond communicating with somebody, I think you need to be doing the photographs because you're wanting to help them. You want, and maybe not directly, but in some ways you want to use your photographs to educate people or to bring their plight to a greater public so that maybe something can change.
Exactly, shine light on the problem.
Right.
Yeah. Cool. So, through the Media Arts program, we have shared the same passion for street photography. In my opinion, it's a way to capture reality while having something to say. Street photography enables the photographer's own perspective and own take on the world around them. For me, street photography gets me in a zone of bliss where nothing else really matters, and it feels like I have endless possibility to the creative world, even though it's reality. Right? So what does street photography do to you, and why do you feel that it's an essential part of society and an essential part of photography in itself?
Again, going back to the idea that you're not dressing it up, you're not altering it with filters, you're not setting things up. Now, having said that, you are trying to be objective, but photography is a trickster, because photography claims objectivity and claims to show reality, and yet there's a whole editing process of what is not in the frame. So you put something in the frame, but you also chose not to put everything else in the frame. So that in itself is a decision that is subjective. So when you're reading photographs that are so-called documentary, you need to look at them with a bit of hesitation because there's been a selective process at work.
Right.
A good photographer is one that is trying to translate something that seems real to him or herself, and then trying to photograph it in such a way that the essence of that story carries through to a viewer.
Right. So I guess sort of perspective of the photographer is really important. For me, I know shooting in black and white most of the time, street photography. It's my preference. I like how it looks, but it also gives a feeling of sort of suspense. You don't really know what's going on with these people, right? And my camera settings that I use sort of have that. So if I take a picture of someone, it doesn't matter what it is, there's already sort of a sense of curiosity. Right? And it's like, okay, well, that doesn't really accurately show that moment in time where you see everything in color. It's a bright sunny day.
Right.
What if they're in the shadow?
Right, but that's where the manipulation comes in as well. So
Right.
Black and white can be like sort of a timeless, but it can also be romantic.
Right.
So you can imbue your subjects in a certain way, and again, that's where the photographer is sort of like their leanings will come into that, right?
Right.
And every photographer, what's great about any of the arts really is that you bring your own perspective to it. So even though we're all using the same machine and pressing the button for a fraction of a second, it is how we frame things and how we see the world that ultimately makes a difference.
When I go out and shoot, the whole process of street photography gets me in a zone of bliss where nothing else matters. I forget about my life, and instead I take on a new identity of the observer through the lens of a camera. This investment in the actions and reactions of strangers allows me to feel as if I have endless possibility in the creative world. I believe that the risk of it, met equally with the interaction of others in the world, is all the more thrilling and is probably the most attractive element for street photographers. Street photography has a certain type of emotion, which is shown through the documentation of everyday life in society. The most important thing in street photography is to capture emotion, humanity, and soul. Street photography equals truth, and it happens when everything naturally comes together within an image to capture exactly what the photographer wanted it to do, giving us the exact feeling that they want us to experience. You may be wondering why someone cares so much about this topic. It's simple. Since the first camera to the industry it is today, and what photography will always be in the future, street photography confronts the fact that every emotion we could ever feel is apparent in reality, that life is inevitable, and that often people are so caught up in society that they forget what it means to be truthful to the reality of life. The people that oppose the idea of street photography are the ones caught off guard, who don't know what you're doing. They are the people that don't understand the art, and in that case, we as street photographers have a responsibility to explain it to them, but not until we've gotten the shot. I'm Nickolas Aurilius, and thanks for listening.